Hey there and welcome. In this one we'll be building a full stack app using React and Django. React will be of course our front end and Django will be our backend. This will be a booking app where you can choose from dates or actually select multiple dates, choose from the rooms that you'd like to book for. You can click book room. It will say booking successful. You can look at your bookings, and of course with all this there is an authentication system where you can log out. This is using token authentication with Django's Django REST framework. So these are your bookings. You can have a look at all the rooms, which will fetch the rooms and the images as well from Django. The way we are going to implement this is with a completely free deploy. We'll be deploying the Django app to render, and as for the media files, we'll be deploying them to Cloudinary, which gives you 10 gigabytes of free storage. And our backend, after all, will look a little bad if you just visit, for example, the admin site or all this, but that's not a problem because we'll be using the front end to manage all that. We'll be continuously sending requests, getting data, and doing all that full stack stuff that most developers want to be. This was my first time creating a project like this. This was actually my practice project, practicing Django REST framework, so my explanation may not be the clearest, but if you're interested, follow along with me and let's get started. Alright, so let's start building our backend. First of all, I have a folder opened called Booking App, and inside that I created the backend and the frontend folder, and I opened up the backend folder right here in VS Code. I will be creating a packages.txt file where I will be collecting what we need to install with pip install. But before we do any of that, open up a new terminal in here. And we'll be needing to create a virtual environment. We'll be doing that with the command python 3 -m venv env, meaning the name of the virtual environment will be env. And just run this command. For some of you, this won't be python 3, but instead just simply Python. So let's run that command instead, because that's probably what I'll be needing too. And once that's done, you'll see that inside your folder there was an env library created. And what you can do now is say /env/scripts/activate. Not the activate.exe, but just simply activate. And I of course mistyped it. Now you can see that we are in our virtual environment. The reason we need a virtual environment is because when you're downloading Django packages, or not just Django but Python packages, you don't want them to conflict with the other ones that are already on your computer. So for this, we'll be simply moving on, working in our virtual environment. And if you have a look at our packages.txt, if I just lower this window, I will copy these commands and paste them into our virtual environment. This will install Django REST framework, which we'll be heavily using to build our API, and pygments. Paste in those commands. Once they were successfully installed, I'll clear the console. And now we can start creating our backend, which is a Django project. Now inside our backend folder, to create our Django project, I simply say Django admin start project, and then I call it booking backend. Run this command. And as you see, we have our booking backend created with the manage.py inside it. Now what I'll be doing is seeding into our booking backend. And after that, I'll be creating another app. This will be our room booking app. So Python manage.py start app, and I call it room booking. If you look at in this side, we have our app created. This is where we'll be spending most of our time. The first thing that we'll be doing in our project is setting up our settings.py a little bit, and then moving on to creating our models, then our serializers, and then our views, and merging it all together in the URLs so that our API will be complete. So inside the settings.py, in our installed apps, I'll add the name of our newly created app. The name of your app, you can find what you named it in the apps.py. It's room booking. So copy that and paste it over to our installed apps. And not only that, but we did install REST framework. So I'll also put here REST_framework. There will be a bunch of other apps we need to add in here, but we'll do that later. For now, let's just move on. And on the sidebar in your room booking app, search for the models.py. And before we do anything in here, let's run our server so we know that our boilerplate is working. Python manage PI and run server. And I do get a huge error. That's because I forgot to add the comma over here. Now this should be working. And there we go. If you visit localhost 8000 right now, you should be able to see your boilerplate. And there we go. We successfully installed Django. Now let's move back to our models. The way we'll be setting up our models is that we are going to create everything all together because they are all connected to each other, and I've planned it out, and basically they just cannot really run except for the room without one another. So the first one that we'll be doing is creating a class, and the first model is going to be the room, which we'll import from the models.model. It's just a simple model. You've used Django before, I'll assume. And this will have multiple variables. First of all, it's going to have a name, of course. It's going to have a type. It will have a price per night. It will have the type of currency you pay in, a max occupancy as how many people can stay for the night in that room, and a description as well. But it's that simple. Along with that, of course, it's going to have an image, but since it's going to have multiple images, it's going to be a different model altogether. So let's start creating these. The name will be models.carfield. Its max length will be 100. It will be blank by default, so blank if I could type it out. And by default is going to be empty. Now as for the type, we'll be having to create a chooser, and this will be room types. Open up brackets over here, and inside that put some keys. For example, there is going to be a suit type, which will be referred to as suit. There will be a standard type, which will be referred to as standard room. And there will be a deluxe type, which will be referred to as deluxe room. That's basically it, and we'll be doing the same for the currency as well. So let me just copy that over real quick, because it's basically the same syntax. And as for the type, let's just create it, and it will be models.carfield. Its max length will be 100, and it will have a choices field, which will be set to the room types. So to speed up the process, let me just go ahead and write this out. You can feel free to copy this over from the source code. It will be provided. There we go. I've copied over the price per night, the currency, max occupancy. I just wanted to really speed up the process. These are pretty obvious what each of them do. And I will also be copying over another value. This will be how it's displayed in the panel, in the admin panel. And now that we have this, I won't be creating the other models yet. I move on to registering it in our admin.py, and then we'll create a serializer for this one. All I'm going to do here is from.models, I'm going to import the room object, and then admin.site.register, and then register the room. This will make sure that we'll be able to see this in the admin panel. And actually, let's try this out. I've stopped the development server for now and call Python manage PI create super user, because we don't have a super user yet to enter our admin. And of course, it won't let me create the super user because I haven't migrated yet. So Python manage PI make migration. There we go. And then Python manage PI migrate. And now we can create our super user, give it a name. I'll go with the default ones for now. The email address, go with some simple password. I won't be giving a complicated one. It's saying that it's too common. Yes, that's completely fine for me for testing purposes. And now we can run our development server once again. Python manage PI run server. If you come back to our app and search for /admin, I can pass in my username, and I can also pass in my password and log in. Now what I should be seeing is that rooms appeared over here. Let me just zoom in, and we can add the new room. I won't be doing that for now because then we'd have to delete the database when we add new models. I'll be adding all the new models before we actually add the data. But just so you see how it's set up, you can choose the type over here. You can choose the currency, the max occupancy, the description, all that. Next, we'll move on to creating our serializers. Let's create in our app, our room booking app, a new file called serializers.py. room.py. The reason we need serializers is because we need to convert our Django-based data, our Django-based models, into some other type of data, like for example JSON, that's processable by the frontend. And that way our API can throw the JSON to our frontend, and the frontend can render it, process it, do whatever it wants to do with it. To create a serializer, first of all, we'll be using REST framework. So from REST framework, import the serializers class. And we also need our models, so from .models, import the room. The first serializer that we'll be creating will be the room serializer. So class room serializer, and I'll jump right onto the main stuff. It will inherit from the serializers.hyperlinked model serializer. What the hell I am talking about, right? The reason I want a hyperlinked model serializer is because we'll be building an API route, an entry point basically, where there will be links listed, hyperlinks, which then will navigate you to the given model and the given data for that model. It will make sense once we integrate it into our views.py. For now, just follow along with it. There will be some other stuff, we'll be expanding this as well. For now, let's create a meta class inside this. This is the given syntax that Django REST framework gives us for serializers. And in here, you have to assign a model to the serializer. Luckily, we do have our model, which will be the room, meaning it will automatically process everything inside the room model. And all we have to say is which fields should it include. For that, we'll give a list, and I pass in a URL. A URL is needed for our hyperlink model serializer. We need an ID that's basically built in. We need the name of it. We need the type, price per night, and I'll go over this and paste it in because I'm sure you don't want to see me just type this out. And we have to remove some things from here. For example, the images, we don't have the images field yet. And we don't have the occupied dates field yet either. Now with this, our serializer is basically ready. What this does is that it converts our model-based data into proper processable data. We have to integrate this in our views now. The views will basically define our API and our API path. What I'd like to do is to be able to call to the room list API, meaning we list all the data, and then there will also be a room detail which will only list one given data. For that, we have to import some things from Django REST framework. Actually quite a few, it will expand as we go. But for now, from REST framework, import the generics. These will be the generic views that REST framework provides, and they are very, very handy. You see it in a minute. And from the models, as usual, we import the room. Now to create our view, this will be a class-based view. It will be called room list, and it will inherit from the generics.list create API view, meaning it can list out all the room data that we have, and it can also create. So it can receive post requests. There are a few REST generics a bunch of other API views that we'll be using. These are basically pre-made to handle post, get, put, update, whatever requests that you want them to. For example, there's a simple create API view, destroy. There is the basic generic, which will allow you to override everything. There is the retrieve API view, but as I said, we'll be going with the list create API view. For this, you have to give a query set as what data do you want it to show? And it will be the room.objects.all. I want all the data to be fetched from over there. You have to give a serializer class. Well, luckily for us, we already created that, so it will be the room serializer, but we need to import that. So from .serializers import room serializer, if I didn't mistype it. There we go. And below that there will be something called permission classes, but we'll be going over that a little bit later, because we don't want just anyone to access our API. Otherwise, we'll get DDoSed, or simply someone will use up all our API from our bots. There is something that I'd still like to do. As I said, we'll be having an entry point. An entry point meaning where we list all the APIs that we have. For that, we still need to import some things from REST framework. For example, from REST framework.decorators, we have to import the API view decorator, and from REST framework.response, we have to import the response. This is a basic generic response object that's very handy. It's far better than the basic HTTP redirect or HTTP 404 that Django provides. This is provided by REST framework, so it handles a lot of functionalities by default. Now, as for the API view, what we'll be doing is defining an API route path over here. It will receive a request and a format which by default will be set to none. And all it's going to do is return a response. And inside this response, you give back basically an object. It will have the rooms key and it will use the reverse. I actually have to import this. So from REST framework.reverse, import reverse. There we go. And this will refer to the name that will be implying in our API. It will be called room list in my example. And you'll see it in our URLs once we hook this up, what I mean. Its request is going to be the request that's passed in, and its format, it's going to be the format that's passed in. That's all about it. For now, we don't have any other things, so I go with this. And now we have to create a urls.py in our room booking. We have to import some other Django related things. From django.urls, import the basic path. This is the default that everybody uses. From room booking, we have to import the views.py, and from REST framework.url patterns, we have to import the format suffix patterns. This will be appended to our URL patterns, so REST framework handles our URLs properly. And then I create the URL patterns object. Inside that we'll be defining our routes basically. So there will be one, which will be our route. And of course, it's going to be the views.API route, and its name will be API route. Next, we'll be creating our other one, which will be the path rooms / basically just listing all the rooms, and we'll be calling the views.roomList. And since it's a class-based view, we'll be calling the as view, because if it was a class-based view, we wouldn't be. Or sorry, if it was a function-based view, we wouldn't be having to call the as view, but now we do. And remember what I called this? It was called room list in the reverse. So as for its name, it will be room-list. And below that, we imported the format suffix patterns. So let me just copy this, and I'll set the URL patterns to be the format suffix patterns. This was found in the documentation of Django REST framework, and you pass in your URL patterns. This will make sure that Django REST framework handles your patterns. And now we go back to the URLs in our main app, and below our admin, we need a basic route. This will be for our entry points, and we'll include, actually, I have to import the include next to the path. We'll include another URL or view. This will be the room booking .urls, and we have to append something to this URL patterns. URL patterns plus equals, we have to add in the path, then inside the parentheses, API auth, and include, and we'll include the REST framework.urls. This is needed because it will enable us from the REST framework view to log in. One other thing I missed here is that we've imported the API view decorator, but we haven't applied it. So here I've applied it at API view, and then you specify what type of methods are allowed, which is basically the get method. And I do get an error over here, which I still have to figure out why I'm getting it. And the reason I'm getting this type error is I finally figured it out. It's because I haven't implied the name in here. I only said API route, which is false. So now if I save, I should be able to get rid of this error and actually rerun the development server. There we go. It's now not complaining. And inside the other URLs, what we've basically done here is we've added a little login field to the development server. You'll see it in a minute. For now, let's just visit it. If I come to our route, you can see that it's completely changed. it's not our boilerplate anymore. It's basically the stuff that Django REST framework provides us with. As you can see, there are options over here. You can choose the method that you'd like, which is basically just get. If I press the get method, it puts me back, this is our API, which puts me back with a link. I can visit our rooms and I can send data over here because this is a list create API view. I will maybe zoom out so you can see it a little bit better. We can basically post this data. There is a problem with it because anyone can post data, and up here at the top right edge, I can log out. This is what the URL patterns that we've appended gives us. Let me show you what it does if I remove that. If I comment this out, save and come back, if I refresh, there is no arrow here to log out. That's why we needed to append that URL patterns and comment this back. Then that will again be available. Let me just refresh this, and there we go. I can now log out, and I can, if I log out, I can log in as well. It will pass me to the Django REST framework. Pass in my credentials, and there we go. Now let's try this form out real quick. I'll fill this up. For some reason, something went wrong and the USD is not here. We'll have a look at that later. And we get an error. Could not resolve URL for hyperlinked relationship using view room detail. The reason for this is probably because we haven't implemented room detail yet, because the way it works is that you send the post request and then it redirects you to a single room page where the posted data is present, but it's not yet implemented. So maybe we should work on that now. To work on that, it's going to be fairly similar to the room list view. Basically what we'll say is class room detail. If I could type it out, room detail, and then it will inherit from the generics dot retrieve update destroy API view, because I'd like to be able to get it, to update it, and to destroy it, meaning delete it basically. The query set is going to be the same, room dot objects dot all, and the serializer class is going to be the same as well. It will be the room serializer. All we have to do is hook this up in our URLs. Basically just come to the URL patterns over here, pass in another path. It will be the rooms slash, and it will be a slug, meaning it will be the primary key, or not really a slug, but it will be the primary key that we are looking for example, ID of type 1, and then put a slash after that as well. And it will be views.roomDetail, roomDetail.sView, because it's a class-based view, remember? And its name will be the room-detail. It shouldn't cause any errors in our console. And now if I refresh the page and send the data again, you can see over here that it got created with the 201 status put back. And this is our new data. If I was to have a look at the admin, this would be created. So that's great. We basically handled a get and a post request as well. If I enter in the URLs /1, you'll see that I have the option to delete it, to get it, to put it, meaning to update it. And this is our data. I can also go to 2, I believe. Yes, there we go, because this is also the deluxe one. So basically, we've handled a lot of functionality over here. Next, we'll expand on the models and then continue creating the serializers and creating the custom user, the occupied dates, and really expand the whole database. Okay, now with this done, let's move back to our models. I don't know if the explanations are too clear. This was my first project, my first fully fledged project that I've connected the front end and the back end. So basically this was a practice project for me, and I'm trying to give the information out to you. But what we'll be doing now is I'll close these up. We'll be moving back to our models. The reason is because I'd like to create some other models as well. For example, as I said, we'll be having images for the rooms, but the room can have multiple images. On the contrary, an image can be bound only to one room. And since there is no way of saying that this should be an array in Django, an array of images, what we have to do is create the room image class. So room image, it will inherit from the models.model from all the others, just like that. And it will have an image field. Now this image is going to be the models of type image field. This image field is going to have an upload to field, which will be the room images slash, just like this. This will mean it will be a folder like that. It will have a caption, which will be the models.car field, and its max length is going to be 255. It will be blank by default, so blank true, and the null will be equal to true as well. And there will be a room. And this room is going to be a models.foreign key. What does this mean? As I said, an image can only be bound to one room, but a room can have multiple images. This is the type of relationship that a foreign key provides us. So what model is it going to be the foreign key of? It's going to be connected to a room. It needs a related name, which will be images, just like this, just that VS Code always gets in the way. And then on delete, what we'll do is say models.cascade. So if either the room gets deleted or some other stuff gets deleted, it will get merged together. This is the basic that most people use when working with Django. It's just a case scenario that if some data gets deleted, Django handles it well. And there will be a string image for self.room.name and self.caption, or no caption if the self.caption is null. This is just basically the display. Now let's go back to our serializer, because we have to set that up as well, right? Above our room serializer, it's important that it's above, we'll create the class room image serializer. It will inherit from the serializers.model serializer, and it will have a room field. This is a custom field that we give it. It will be from the serializer.hyperlink related field. It will have a field called view name, which will be set to room detail. As of whenever you're looking at a room detail, this will appear as a hyperlink so that you know which room it is bound to, this image is bound to. And it will also have a query set, which will be the room.objects.all. These two are required, and make sure that these two are actually inside the hyperlink related field over here, just like this. And let me break this up because the formatters don't seem to be working. There will be a class of type meta, and it will be having a field called model, just as before. It will be the room image whatsoever, and we didn't import it, so copy this and paste it over here. We'll be importing the room image, and also give it its fields. The fields will be yet again a list. It will have the ID, it will have the image, it will have the caption, and it will have the room. It's great we've created room image serializer, but now we need to hook the two together. So in the room serializer, above the class, I create an images field, and it will be the room image serializer with many set to be true. That means it will create an array of these images, and they will be read-only. Read-only equals to true. And we get a bunch of errors saying we have to install Pillow for the room image to be working, actually for this image field to be working. So I come to the packages. Do we have that open? There we go. And I say pip install Pillow. I stop the development server and paste this in. Actually, this should be lowercase, but it did install correctly. And now I can run my development server once again. No, there are no errors given. Let's hide this and have a look. Let's go to the room, or let's go to the admin panel first. And I don't see the room image over here, which is bad. So I actually forgot to add it. To the admin panel, import the room image and simply say the same as we did here and pass in the room image. That means it will appear in our admin panel, and that's also not enough. I have to migrate. Python manage PI make migrations, and Python manage PI migrate. There we go. Now I can run the development server, and there we have the room images. I can actually add images, choose a file here and upload. And I can choose for which room do I want to. We have 2 deluxe rooms, so I guess that doesn't really make sense, but no worries. We'll be deleting the database later on anyways. So let's create maybe this image, deluxe one. It will be the deluxe one, and it will be for this room. Save. And if I click on the room images slash deluxe1.jpg, it's not getting served. We have to play around in our URLs and our settings.py so that this actually gets served and we can have a look at the image. But let's have a look at the rooms for now. So rooms, and it's saying, if I actually went to the room detail page, let's go to the rooms. It's saying the same images was declared on the room serializer, but it's not added to the fields option, which is something we have to fix. So I come back to the serializer and pass in the images over here. Let's see now. Maybe we have to, oh, I got an error. And I've actually added this to the wrong place, cut the images over here and put it back to the end after the description. I restart the development server. Now if you have a look, it loads properly. So there was a little mishap from my side over there. And as you see, there is an image added over there. If I zoom in, this is the first deluxe room. And it's not found, as I said, it's not serving the files yet. Let's actually work on serving our images from Django. And also the reason we are not seeing the field to upload images, I believe, is because we haven't included Pillow into our apps. Come down to the bottom of your file, your settings.py, and I'll put a comment here for offline serving. We have to set the media URL to be the /media/, or at least that's where I'd like to store my files. And then we'll set the media root, and we have to import our operating system for this. So import OS, and this will be os.path.join. And base dir is the basic directory that's provided up above. If you have a look at our settings.py, I say media. And this will make sure that there is a folder called media that will contain our images, but that's not enough. We have to come to our URLs. So this will be the URLs in the room booking app. And under our format suffix patterns, I have to import the settings from django.conf, import settings, and from django.conf.urls.static, I have to import static as well. And if settings.debug, and this is with full uppercase letters, this is a built-in variable. This is true by default because we are developing. In production, this will be set to false. If it's in debug, we'll append the URL patterns with the static settings.media URL, just like we set it before, and the document root will be set to settings.media root. This way we apply our images to be served, and I mistyped it, media. Over here I delete our current image that we've created in the admin view. Yes, I'm sure I want to delete it, and I'll add the new one. Let's actually add the deluxe back to the deluxe room, and it will be called deluxe1, and I'll save it. Now if I come and have a look at this, if I click the link, it now loads the whole image. That means our files are being served offline. That's great news for us. Now if you have a look at the links, for example, I'm at the room detail /1. If you click the link, you'll be served the media file. So this not only works from the admin view, it actually works from the actual data that's returned. And I can come to the rooms. The second one doesn't have an image, but the image is also shown over here. It's the same link, so if you click it, you will actually get it. And if you have a look in our folder, there is a media folder created inside our root booking backend folder, and there is the deluxe1.jpg uploaded. So this is where it stores it locally. Later we'll be integrating this with another service, so it's actually deployed and not from our machine. But for now, that's really good progress. Next, we'll be creating the occupied dates model and setting it up with a serializer. Alright, so the next model that I'd like to create is going to be the occupied date model. Why do we need it? We need it because as it's a booking app, I'd like the users to occupy dates for certain rooms. And so we have to somehow signal this. And an occupied date will be attached to a room, but it will also be attached to a user. What do I mean by that? Well, let's create the occupied date model first. It will inherit from the models.model, and it's going to have a meta class just as before. and it's going to have a date field. That's all it's going to have by default. It's going to be the models.date field, nothing too crazy. But what I'd also like it to have is a reference to the room, because it needs to be referred to a room. And that will be a room field it will have. And it will be a models.foreign key. An occupation can only be connected to one room, but one room can have multiple occupations. And as I said, it will be attached to the room. On delete, it will be the models.cascade. And the related name is going to be the occupied dates. That's it for now. We can move on to creating its serializer now. So below the room serializer, let's create another class. This will be the occupied date serializer. It will inherit from the serializers.hyperlinked model serializer, and it's going to have a meta class just as before. As I said, you have to specify in the meta class what fields you'd like to have, and you have to give a model. Now this model isn't imported yet, so I have to import it over here. And what I also have to do is create a separate field, because this now renders the basic fields, but I need it to be hyperlinked so that it's properly accessible from our API entry point. For that, we'll create a room field, and this will be a serializer.hyperlink related field. And inside that, we'll give some values. For example, the view name is going to be room-detail, and its query set also needs to be specified, which will be the room.objects.all. Now that we have this serializer and we have the actual model, first of all, I'm going to come here and register this model, admin.site.register, and then pass in the occupied date. That's not enough. I'd still like to hook this up, because this is something that I'd like to have multiple APIs for, so that the users can fetch their occupied dates. For that, we'll be having something very similar to the two of these, so copy them over. This will be called occupied dates list, and it will be the occupied date.objects.all, and we need to import it, as well as its serializer. So first the serializer, then the occupied date.objects.all, and the occupied date serializer. As for its detail, just copy this over once again. It's pretty easy to work with this now, right? It's the Django REST framework's built-in models, so we can come to our URLs and actually hook them up. What I'd like to do here is create some new paths. This new path is going to be the occupied dates, and it's going to be of the views.occupied dates list.sview, because we have to convert it into a class-based or a function-based view at the end. And let's give it a name. It will be the occupied date list. Copy this once again, and this time give it a different, put a comma here and give it a different root. It will be a primary key int, just as before, and it will be the occupied dates detail. I have to name this occupied dates list, detail. Rename this because I forgot to do so. And now we can refer to it, occupied dates detail, and it will be the detail as well over here. You can name this whatever you'd like. And now we have to come and Python manage PI, make migrations. I have no changes because I've already migrated actually, but I'm just showing you that you have to do that. And then Python manage PI migrate, and this should apply the migrations. And now run your development server. You should be able to see your occupied dates. I've already created one in the admin view. Go on and play around with that. And as you see, we already have links set up from the hyperlinked views. So I can go to the /1 and it will show me the room that it's referred to. There we go. It also shows this one. So it's pretty neatly set up. And I can change this to be for a different room or for a different date. Now this is pretty nicely set up, but as you can see, the basic way Django handles the users is by them having a username and then giving the password. But what I'd like to have instead is an email password authentication. So for that we have to write a new authentication backend, and we have to write a new custom user. And not only that, but I'd like to store the user in the occupied date as well. So these are all things that we have to take into consideration. For that, we'll be creating our custom user. We'll be overriding the default user basically. And this new user is going to be deriving from the abstract user that Django provides us. So from django.contrib.models import the abstract user. This is how you override the basic user. And since we'll be needing it, from django.conf import the settings as well. You'll see in a minute why we need this. For now, it will just derive from the abstract user. In the email, we have to make sure that the models.email field is set to be unique true, because by default, Django doesn't identify by the email. It identifies by the username, and so it's not set to be unique. That's what we have to change, first of all. Then what else do we need to change? I'd like to have a full name field, which will simply be a models.carName car field, with its max length being set to 100 and its default being blank. That's what I'd like to have on the user. You can expand upon this however much you like. And while we're at it, we should also hook this up to the occupied date, because the user should know what dates he's occupying. So user equals models.foreign key, and here we have to refer to the user, but I say this and it will throw us an error later on. On delete, I say models.cascade, and the related name, this will be the booked dates. It's just that VS Code is always popping up this window. There we go, booked dates. First of all, this isn't imported. And second, we've not yet overwritten the default user. How are we going to override it? For that, come to your settings.py, and down below our media, for example, we have to set the auth user model to be the room_booking, because that's our app name, .user. This is what you have to do. We'll be coming back to here later because we still need to override the default backend as well. But for now, just refer to the settings, because we've imported this auth user model. Pretty simple. We are referring to the same name that we set in our setting. Now this should be set up well now. I will also copy over something else. This is just so we can see a formatted way of the occupied dates. And now what I like to do is in our room booking, create a new file called auth_backend.py. This is where we'll be overriding the default authentication. First we need to import some stuff we'll be working with. So from django.contrib.auth import the getUser model, and also from django.contrib.auth.backend import the model backend. This will allow us to override our current backend. And I will call this email backend, as this will be an email-based authentication. It will derive from the model backend. We have a default function that we can override, which will be the authenticate. It will receive a bunch of parameters. You don't really have to worry about them. I will make it a little bit shorter. There we go. Now it fits. These are the ones that will be okay for us. And I won't be returning the basic functionality. Instead, we'll be writing our own. The user model is going to be the getUser model. Because we've already overwritten it, it's actually pretty good for us. Then we'll put in a try-catch block. We'll try to set the user to be the user model.objects.get, and we are looking for an object where the email is actually equal to the username that's given. That means the email and the username will still remain, but the username will also be the email. If that makes any sense, basically. And if it doesn't work out, we'll say user model dot does not exist, and we'll return none. I fixed some typos over here. Else if user dot check password, this is also a built-in function, and we pass in the password, then we return the user. Actually, let's indent this. Otherwise, if we couldn't authenticate the user, then we return none. Let's go over what this does once again. We are overriding our backend with an email backend. We are redefining the authenticate method, clearing out the default functionality, and instead getting the user model. If we can get a user with the email and password passed in, then we found that user and return it. If we do not find their email at first, then the user doesn't exist. And of course, if it does, we check its password. If it does, we return the user. Otherwise, we return none. It's that simple. Now we can move on to our settings.py yet again, and we can override the authentication. Make sure to put an underscore in here, and it will be the roombooking.auth.backend. Well, actually, let me just copy this over because it's tough to type out. Authentication backends will be set to the roombooking.authbackend.email backend. That's okay, but I still need the authentication provided by the REST framework. We'll be needing to import some other packages, but actually, let's leave it for later. I still want to filter the data from our models, or sorry, from our views, actually, from the API. Because right now the occupied dates list returns all the occupied dates and all the user information to anyone. And that's not desirable. That's not what I want. What I want instead is to return only the data that's relevant to the user, or if the person asking is an admin or a staff user or super user, then he should receive the whole data. So for that, we'll override the get query set over here. And above this, before the return statement, we'll set the user to be the self.request.user. If not user.isSuperUser and not user.isStaff, then we simply return the filtered data. Occupied date.objects.filter, and we filter where the user is equal to the given user from the request. Meaning, if a simple user called John is fetching the data, he will only get the fetch data back where the user is set to John. But if an admin is asking, we'll return the default functionality, which is returning everything. I hope that makes sense. Now we should probably migrate our database. So Python manage PI make migrations. And it's saying that we should provide one of default. So maybe it's just better to delete our whole database, and I'll show you how to do that. Because when you're developing like this, you will be needing to delete your database from time to time, at least while starting out. So first of all, I'm going to delete the media folder because I don't need it. Then let's go to the migrations. Inside the migrations, delete everything instead the init.py. Also delete the whole PyCache folder. Make sure to do this right, delete it, and also delete the db.sqlite. Now we should be good to go. We should be able to migrate now. Make migrations, and it's working, and I can then migrate. And those are all applied. Of course, we don't have any data now in our database. So we don't have anything to test out now. Maybe we should just move on with the authentication then. Because we've created our basic user model, but we didn't create the serializer for it yet. And there is also another very big mistake that we've made here, is that right now we are not hashing the password since we've overwritten our user. So let's jump to our serializer now, and we need to make an import here before creating the serializer from django.contrib.auth.hashers. This will hash the password that we'll be storing. Import make password. We'll say class user serializer, and it will inherit from the serializers .hyperlinked model serializer, just everything did before. It will have the meta class. I will copy this over to save some time. It's going to be from the user model, but we need to import that user model. and we import it over here, user. Once we have the user, we'll set a URL for this one as well. This is for the hyperlink model instances. We set an ID, the username and password remain, the email remains as well, and we have the full name field that we've given by hand. And what we need now is to override the password validation. We have to hash the password before we save it. Def validate password. It will receive the self and the value, and we simply return make password with the value passed in. This will hash the password before saving it. This user stuff is getting really complicated, right? Don't worry about it. Just follow along and it will make sense eventually. Now, before I make any more changes and before I create a super user, there is something else I'd like to implement. There is a token-based authentication that I'd like to implement with Django REST framework, and it came built-in and pre-installed. We just have to apply it. A token is something that will be created when a user either logs in and it's lost, or first of all when he registers. And if someone gets a hold of the token, then he can basically log in to your account and impersonate you. But that's good for us because we can then also secure certain APIs. For example, if you want to access certain API, you have to send your token in the authorization field. And if you don't receive the token, then you won't let the user access the API. So they have to be authenticated for sure. It's not the best type of authentication. There is the GVT, where you always create new tokens, but that's something more complex, and I prefer this simple approach for this video. So for that we have to come to our settings.py and come back to our installed apps. What we have to do is I'll copy the REST framework, paste it in, and we need to apply the REST framework.auth token. So our installed apps now contain the auth token module from the REST framework, and we have to scroll down, and let's say over here below the authentication user overrides, I'll import and copy over a REST framework setting. This is from their documentation. These are the default authentication classes, meaning we can authenticate by default basic authentication, by session authentication, and by token authentication. Feel free to copy this over. You can find it online, you can find it in our GitHub repo, or you can just type it out by hand. But we need this to be able to authenticate our users. And now I come back to our APIs, which is our views, and maybe we should provide a detail and a user list as well. It's going to be fairly similar to what we have over here. So I copy this down 2 times. And it will be called the user list. And it's not going with the retrieve, update, destroy API, but instead the list create API view. Or sorry, not even the list create, it will be the list API view, because I wouldn't want to be able to create just by someone sending post requests to this API. The query set is going to be the user.objects.all, and we need to import the user from our models, and we need to import the user serializer as well. It will be using the user serializer, and I'll be overriding this a little bit. We'll be overriding the get query set over here as well, because if the user is an admin, he should be able to get all the users, otherwise he should only be able to get himself. User equals self.request.user, and if user.isStaff or user.isSuperUser, then we return the user with the user.objects.all. Otherwise we override the default behavior. Let's clear this out and put an else in here, as we are going to return the user.objects.filter, and we'll be filtering by ID. ID will be equal to the user ID, user.id. It's the same type of filtering that we did above. And as for a detail, it will be the generics.retrieve API view. You won't be posting to this view. It will be called user detail, and copy this query set and serializer down here. We'll be needing to protect this root as well. So def get object. This will be overriding the getting of a single object. The user will be the self.request.user as before, and the object is going to be the super.get object. If the object that we got is a user, so it's itself, or if the user dot is Steph, or the user dot is super user, then we simply return the object. So someone who has no admin rights can retrieve themselves. Otherwise, we'll simply, well, pass for now. We'll be needing to raise an exception here later. This is a lot of stuff going on without testing, but don't worry, it will all work out in the end. But these go hand in hand, so we won't be able to test without the tokens being set up. So now there are only two more functionalities that I'd like to implement, which will be the register and the login. So to work on the register and login functionality along with the token creation, these are going to be our last APIs, and then we can jump into testing. Let's work on the register functionality first. So class and register, it's going to be accessible to anyone. It's going to be the generics.create API view. The query set is going to be the user.objects.all, and the serializer class is going to be the user serializer. We've gone through this before, and now we are going to override a default functionality, which is the perform create. I'll delete the default functionality from over here, and we'll get the user. The user will be the serializer.save, meaning we save the user with the data passed in, but we need to create a token for the user. So the token and the created, this will be two variables next to each other. The created won't be used. This is because this function will return a tuple. We use the token, and I actually have to import this. So over here, from REST framework.auth token.models, we import the token. Let's go down back here, and token.objects.get or create, meaning we either get it if it's already existing in the database, or we create a new token for the user if it's not. And the user is going to be the user that was created. Basically, this is the default functionality over here. But if that default functionality succeeds, we create a token for the user, and we have to return some data. So I'll return self.response data, and it will be a simple object. It will have a user inside it with the ID, for example, ID. It will be the user.id, put a comma, and then the username, which will be the user.email, because remember, we're not using the username anymore. The email will simply be the user.email. And as for the last one, the full underscore name will be the user.full underscore name. That's not enough for us just yet. We still need to add a token, and that token will be the token.key. The token object is the one we got, and the key is the actual token that it has. And now we've overwritten this functionality. One last thing to override, because this is just the perform create, and it will get called in the create functionality. So we have to override the create functionality. With this, the register functionality should be good to go, or at least the view should be good to go. We still need to hook it up in our URLs along with the other user related stuff. We actually have to call this the default and not return it, but return the response after this, because remember, this is the response object that we've set. So I just return in the response the self.response data, because this will return a JSON object. From REST framework.views, import the API view class, and it will derive from the API view. And this will only handle post functions. So I'll override the post functionality. It will receive the self and the request just as any type of view would. And I'll also put the args and the kwargs over there. Once that's done, I set the username to be the request.data.get, and we are looking for the username. Because remember, the username is basically set to the email when we register. As for the password, it will be set to the request.data.get and password, the same as the username. And the user is going to be the authenticate. I actually have to pull this in. So up here from django.contrib.auth import authenticate, we have to call the basic authentication function that Django has and pass in a username. The username is going to be equal to the username that we have stored, and the password is going to be equal to the password that we have stored. And this will return to us the user that got created. So if we successfully log in, meaning the user is not none, but we'll check if it is none, then we'll raise an authentication failed error. We have to import this as well. Let me copy the error message over here. Authentication failed. So over here, from REST framework.exceptions, import the authentication failed. Come down where we left off, and this should be working now. Otherwise, we'll get the token for the user that wants to log in. So the token and created will be equal to the token.objects.getOrCreate. And we'll do the same as we did before. We set the user to be the user that we tried to authenticate, and we actually succeeded if we got this far. Then we'll simply return the response as we did before, so I'll just copy this over. This is the response we'll return. It's basically the same structure, and we are done with this functionality. In the URLs, hook this up. So right over here, we'll add new paths. First of all, let's add the user. The user, or users, should I say, because we are listing the users, views.user_list.sview and its related name, or its name. This will be the user-list. Copy this once again, but this time with the user, and then int primary key. And this will be the views.userdetail. Let's put a comma over here. Userdetail.sview and userdetail. So we can list our users. And now comes the login and the other views. So path login slash. And also don't forget to put the slash after the primary key as well. And we'll pass in the views.login.sview, and its name is simply going to be login. We'll do the same for the register. It will be register instead, and register as view, as well as change it to be register here as well. And with this, we should be good to go. The permissions are not yet managed, so we should be able to access everything. But now I can actually create the super user without having to delete the whole database again, because I wanted to get this done because I didn't want to delete it once again. So Python manage PI make migrations. Python manage PI migrate if it wasn't already done. There we go. We needed to migrate, even though we had no migrations, because we've applied in the settings the auth token. Now I can run the server and see if we get any errors. It seems that not yet. Occupied dates loads. Let's look at the users. Yes, we do not have any users, so I'll actually stop the development server and Python manage PI create super user. The username will be, for example, test@gmail.com. Email will be test@gmail.com as well. The good thing about this is that at the front end I can show only the email, and whatever's passed into the email will be passed in automatically to the username, because that's how we'll be setting up the front end. And as for the password, it's going to be rather simple. Some dummy password you should pass in. Yes, it's too common, I know. And there we go. Now I can run the server, and let's have a look now. No module named room booking. That's because there must be a dash. Where did I get this error? API auth login. I got it at the authentication backend. I have to change this. Now it should be working. I don't know if we'll be able to log in. Yep, we didn't log in because we didn't create the user either. Because that was misspelled. Don't misspell it. Use your own app that you named it. So I have to create the super user once again. Test@gmail.com, but it says the username is already taken. It's great. Let's create another one then. Auth@gmail.com. Auth@gmail.com once again. Give it some dummy password again. Yes, it's too common, and there we go. Now I will run the server, and let's log in with auth@gmail.com. And now we actually can log in, and there is our user. Let me zoom in so you see it better. We basically have the first user as well with the test. It has a password hashed like this, so it's stored. User/1 has no attribute get object. That's interesting. Yes, and that's because it's not going to be user, but user and parentheses. That should fix one error. There we go. No occupied dates. That's what we get from over here. And that's again because I also messed up something, so there's nothing wrong with going over these, and it's actually pretty good because you see no occupied date given, but I'm trying to access the user. So somewhere in my views, the user detail, yes, there it is. You see it right there. It should be user.objects and user serializer. If you spotted this while I was typing this out, that's completely fine. And now if we come back, there we have it. So we can see the details of the user. Obviously, when you create a super user, you won't be able to propagate its full name. It's doable, but then you'd have to override some other basic Django stuff. And so this is done. Let's go to the login section, and I can actually pass in some content over here. But this should better be tested from the front end though. Let's see the register functionality. The register is much better. I can pass in a username like me@gmail.com, pass in a password. This is our dummy password, by the way. Pass it in yet again. The full name. Now if I pause this, you can also see the raw data over here. But now if I pause this, and there we go, a new user got created. This is how a token looks like. Let me zoom in. This is how a token looks like. So it actually got created and I can log in with this. And this user, if I log in with him, I can log in from here as well, I believe. me@gmail.com. I can log in, and if I try to access the users, I only get back myself. You can see that the user only got back himself because he's not an admin user. But basically we've implemented this pretty well. There are a few more things I'd like to do with permissions, so let's get those over with, and then we'll move on to our front end. So to handle some permissions, I actually want some custom permissions, not just only the ones that Django REST framework provides us with, which we'll be also using, but some custom ones as well. For that, we'll be creating a permissions.py file, and let's go inside that. REST framework will import the permissions. We'll create two more custom permissions. For example, is owner or read only. And this is something that I believe we won't be using, but I just created because it was a leftover from the code and it's a good practice. So you guys are practicing how to do it. Permissions.base permission is what it's going to derive from. And def has object permission. This is what we'll be overriding. So if request.method in the permissions.save methods. So if, for example, save methods count as the get, all these other methods that don't alter the database, that only read it, then we return true as the user has permissions. Otherwise, we return with the object.user equal to the request.user. That means, for example, we are only able to get the occupied date if the user of the occupied date is the one that's actually requesting it, but we won't be using this as I said, so that's about it. What we will be heavily using is the is admin or read only. It will also derive from the permissions.base permission, so we'll be overriding the default has object permission function. And we'll be copying over this same one over here, because if it's a safe method, we should be able to go along with saying true. Otherwise, we'll return the request.user.is super user. So only super users will be able to access this. And that's not the only function that we'll be overriding. I'll also override the has object permissions. We already override the has object permissions. This has to be has permission. And then this will be the has object permissions down over here. And we have to change some things over here. The object doesn't exist in the has permissions, but we'll do the same over here as we did before. If the methods are safe, meaning they are read only and don't cause any harm, then we let those pass. Otherwise, we again return request.user.is_superuser. So we only let these pass if someone is a super user, meaning an admin. Otherwise, we only let the safe methods be used. That's why is admin or read only, because the safe methods are the read only methods. Now we can come onto our views and go over them one by one. So at the top, let's import from.permissions, import isAdmin or read only. And there is something in the room list that you can set, or at least at every view. For example, permission classes equals isAdmin or read only, meaning you won't be able to create new rooms, but only read the data unless you are a super user. Down below, we'll say the same, isAdmin or read only, if you are trying to destroy, update, or do anything with the rooms. Only admins are permitted to do that. As for the occupied dates, it's going to be a little bit different. It's the permission classes will be only the permissions. I actually have to import this one. So maybe here from REST framework import permissions. There we go. Permissions dot is authenticated or read only. We want to be able to get the dates because it's already set up so that only the user can fetch his own dates, or if you are an admin, then you are able to fetch everything. But I still only want them to be able to read it and not create anything unless they are authenticated. As for the occupied dates detail, I don't want them to get the detail because it contains the user information. So for the permission classes, we'll go with isAdmin or read only. And as for the user list and the user detail, the user list won't be having any of this because already throws you back if you are not authenticated and stuff. And the user detail does the same, so these two do the same. And there was one place here where we passed. Instead, what I'd like to do is raise permissions dot permission denied. Let me just copy this over, just like this, permissions dot permission denied. Maybe I have to import it. Import the permission denied from the REST framework dot exceptions, just like this. And let's see, the register functionality should be available to anyone. And the login functionality is also handled well, so no other things that we need to set up. Our permissions are also now handled. So with this, we are done with our backend. We'll still be coming back to here because we'll have to deal with course and headers and all that stuff if we are going to fetch data from the front end. But now we can actually move on to the front end. Maybe we should create some data before that, but we'll be getting to that. Alright, so I went ahead and filled up the database with data. Please do the same, go over, create some rooms first, then some images and occupied dates, but please don't overdo it. Just make sure there is enough data so that we can start working on the front end, because before the deployment, the whole database will get wiped out. So don't overdo it, just enough is going to do fine. And now we can move on to the front end, where I actually opened up the front-end folder and we'll be creating a React project, which is the usual npm create with at latest. Run this command. Let me zoom in a little more. Run the command. It will ask you to install the following packages. Yes, install them. And the project name will be booking. There we go. Yes, and go with React. We won't be using TypeScript, although at the scale of this project it would be advised to, but I'll go with JavaScript for now. And then cd booking app and npm install. I mistyped it, npm install. Once this is done, we'll start implementing some templates that I'll be providing you in the GitHub repo of the frontend. So don't worry about that. And then we'll be connecting to our local host. So make sure that your local host is also running in a separate Visual Studio code. So just go ahead. Once this is done, open the folder, the front end and the booking app. So if you go ahead to the GitHub repo that we have, there is actually a templates folder where you find a bunch of CSS along with a bunch of JSX. What I'll be doing now is clearing out the main, I'll be clearing out the index.css and the app.css completely, grabbing those from the CSS files. Actually, the app.css is going to be completely empty. The index.css is going to be a little different. Let's see, what do we start with? I probably start with the routing It's a bit unusual of me, but I do not want to restructure the code in the meanwhile because I've had a video about routing and I've done it 1,000 times. I'm a little tired of it. So let's just work on routing. For that, open up a new terminal. First of all, we'll be using React icons. So npm install react-icons, and we'll also be installing the React router DOM. npm install react router DOM. There we go. Now I can close this window up and we'll be working in the main.jsx at first. From React router DOM, we should import these two. You can find it in the app.jsx the GitHub how this is all set up, but you pull in these two and then you create a router. A router will contain your actual routes. This will be an array over here. And inside this array, you provide some path and the element that you'd like to render on the certain route. Something like this. Actually, this has to be wrapped in an object. So let me copy this over, put it inside the object. There we go. And then change out the app to be the router provider. So router provider, and you pass in the router. This will make sure your routes are available. What else? I'd like to create a user provider. You can also find this in the templates, I believe. So let's create a folder called components. And inside that, let's create a new JSX file called user-context.jsx. These are just some pre-made stuff that I'd like to work with called refc. There we go. The extension is working. This will be needed so that we have a context that will provide as the user whenever it's logged in, because I don't want to drill down the components, the props into the components. I'd like this to be accessible from everywhere. So up here above the user context, I say export const user context, and this will be the create context from React. It will get auto imported, hopefully. And then delete the current implementation of the user context and say export const, let's remove the default export, user provider. And this will receive the children, which is whatever is wrapped in the component will get rendered if certain conditions are met. There will be a const user and set user as a use state equals use state, and it will be null by default. I'm in a little bit of a rush here, and you don't have to worry about it. It's just because the front end is quite messy at times, and I actually have to wrap this in simple parentheses. And I really just want to get on going with this because most of these things are very basic. And we return user context dot provider. Make sure to copy this provider over here as well. So whatever's wrapped in this user context be provided with the user that we'll be setting. It will render the children out, and its base value will be set to be a user, will be set to be an object where there is a user and the set user. These are the two functions from our use state. That's basically it. Now what I like to do is come back to our main.jsx and import this user provider. So user provider. Let's see. There we go. It gets an auto import. And I can wrap the whole router provider in the user provider, meaning we'll be able to access the user from anywhere. And that's really important for us because remember when we set up at the backend how there is a token for every user, that token needs to be sent at every API call. Because for that, the authorization header must be set so it knows that we are authenticated and it won't throw us back. That's the basic token authentication that we've implemented. And now that this is done, let's move into let's run the development server so that we know what we're doing. npm run dev. We're not getting any errors, but it's not rendering anything either. I don't know what's going on. I mistyped this over here. This should be children because this is a special prop in React. All right. So now this is loading. It was just that mistype. It's perfect. We can now remove the boilerplate. I'll create the navbar first, so we have a type of routing, and then we'll create the booking component. So let's create a new file over here called navbar.jsx and navbar.css, and actually go into the templates on our GitHub, and you can grab the whole navbar.css, and you can also grab the navbar.jsx with all its imports. So I just gave it to you pre-made. This is a very basic React router DOM. We have links instead of hrefs, and I already have most of the preset stuff. For example, it's already reaching out to the user. Let me zoom in a little more. If the user is null, then we won't be able to render, for example, the login. Or sorry, if the user is null, we are able to render the login, but not the logout and other stuff like that. There is also navigate grabbed in, handle logout, which is just basically removing the local storage user and setting the user to null and navigating back. So these are pretty basic, but we'll go over them once again if it's needed. Let's come to our app.jsx and delete everything, even this use state. And let's actually render something else, like in a fragment. Let's render the navbar. There we go. There is the auto import and also the outlet from React router DOM. This will make sure that the children are actually rendered. And we do need a little bit of check in here in the app.jsx for user handling purposes. I'll pull in the current user const, user and set user, and these will be set with the use context. And inside the use context, they will receive the user context. This is also imported automatically. You can see it up above. And we'll be implementing a use effect, meaning the use effect will run at the start of the load of the component when it's mounted. Const stored user. We get the user from the local storage. So local storage.getItem user. The reason we are storing it in a local storage and in a context as well is because of the sessions, because if someone logs in, it's currently running in the context and in the local storage as well. But if he just closes the tab and opens back up, we'll be able to log him in with the token that we've stored in the user data in the local storage. So that's why I'm storing the user. And if the stored user is not null, but by default is going to be null, then we set the user. So we call set user json.parse stored user. Otherwise, I'll also just set the user, but this time I set him to be null. Set user and null. There also needs to be a loading state, const loading, set loading, nothing too crazy about it. And if we are loading, actually let's set loading to false once this is done, once the use effect is done, set loading to be false. This loading is needed because when I was first developing this, there was a race condition between two use effects getting the local storage data, and it ran into some problems. So unless we are fully loaded and the use effect is over, we are not going to render anything. If loading, we are going to return a div called loading, or saying loading. That's basically it for our app. Maybe I'll zoom out a little to be more concise about it. Let's have a look at the app now and what it does. There we go. Basically, we have our routes over there. They are not yet functional because I haven't defined those routes explicitly. But that shouldn't be a problem because now we can start moving on to the booking component, which is going to be the juicy stuff and which I will explain in further depth because it's working with dates, just like we have over here. This is what we'll be building. All right, let's move on with creating the front end. And what I like to do is create the authentication. So this time we'll actually be reaching out to the server. To do that, first of all, there is a guest route.jsx that I've provided you in the templates. Just copy that to the components. That's a completely fully fledged route. It's a route guard, meaning you will only be able to access a certain route if you are logged in. The other thing that I'd like you to copy over from the templates is the outform.jsx. Copy it over here and along with its CSS file, of course. Now this outform has some basic functionalities implemented, but basically nothing too crazy because I removed the main reaching out to the server. So it's just basically HTML with a little bit of event handling. Let's go to our main.jsx and let's create children array for our main route, meaning we can access things over here. The reason we have to do this is because this way we will always be having access to the navbar. And inside the children, create another path. it will be the /auth, and its element is going to be, well, first for the guest root, because I don't want logged in users to access the login or the register once again because they are well logged in. And inside that, I want to render the auth form. Let's see if I can reach this site now with the auth. If we come over here, actually I have logout for some reason. Maybe that's a leftover from before when I was developing the real app. So let's click logout and let's click on login. Now we get redirected over here and I can switch between login and sign up. So that's great. Now all we have to do is handle the actual functionality. So let's open up this authform.jsx. I close every other tab. And let's actually start with the use effect as well here. So use effect. This will run whenever we navigate to the navbar. It will have an empty dependency array. And all I'm going to do here is if user, that means we have a user, then we navigate back to the slash, meaning the home page. It's pretty simple. Now we have to handle the login. For this, what I'm going to do is that we are actually with the event handling implying the form data into this form data use state. And what I'll do is let user data will be equal to the form data, meaning I get out whatever data it already has whenever this is submitted. And I implement try catch block. The catch is going to be relatively simple. We just log out the error. But as for the try block, I have to somehow reach out to the server. How am I going to do that? Well, I'll say const response, because if I reach out, it's going to throw me back a response. And I call the built-in fetch function. Inside the built-in fetch function, I call to the HTTP column // It's important that it's HTTP, not HTTPS, because this is basically our server, and localhost 8000, and put a slash at the end. And we are looking for the login inside that. Remember how our API works? We're looking for the login. Now as the second parameter, we are giving whatever data this needs. We define the method, which will be post, because we want to log in, we want to reach out to the server. We define some headers because that's required, and we define the content type over here. So content type, meaning what type of data are we sending? And it's going to be pretty straightforward because it's going to be application/JSON. And here comes the main part, which is the body. What we are going to send in the body is the JSON.stringify, because I'd like to stringify it into a JSON format from a JavaScript object. And I'm passing in as the email, the user data.email password. I'm passing in the user data.password, and as the username, I'm also going to be sending out the user data.email, because remember, we actually changed the username to be the email instead. This should be handling our login, but we still need to do some other stuff. For example, handle if it was not okay. For example, if not response.okay, then we are going to throw a new error, saying login failed. And I'll also fetch back the data just to see what we got back. Data will be equal to the await response.json, because the JSON function returns a promise which we have to await. This will give us back the data in a proper JavaScript format. After that, I just like to log out some data, and what we'll do is save whatever we got back into the local storage, because at this time it's clear that we didn't get any errors, so we successfully logged in. So local storage.setItem, and I call it the user, and I pass in the data. But that's not enough, because the local storage only stores string data, so instead JSON.stringify and then the data. What I'll also do is set the user, that's from the context, to be the data, and I navigate back to the home page. This should handle our basic login functionality, but I'm telling you right now that we'll be having some coarse errors, but that's completely fine. Let's test this out. Let's say I want test@gmail.com, and I want to log in. What type of errors do we get? Login failed, that's alright. Access to fetch at localhost 8000/login from origin has been blocked by course policy. That's because we did not allow it in the backend to send any requests. For that we'll need to install some other packages in Django. So let's get back to our backend. I stop the development server for now and we'll say pip install, and make sure you're in your environment, your virtual environment. Pip install Django course headers. We successfully installed this. Now we have to come to our settings.py and actually apply this. So I'll hide this for now. In our installed apps, I need to include this. And this simply runs by the name course headers. That's all for the installed apps. But we also need middleware for this. So I'll copy this over. You can type it out or copy it from the source code. This is the course headers.middleware.course middleware. We are almost done with handling the functionality, but there is actually an object that lets you specify which APIs or routes are permitted to access your API. So come down to the bottom, and there are two settings that I will set over here. And this will be a list, and inside that we'll say localhost and then your localhost number, but make sure to put http column / over there. Do not put a slash at the end here. And when you deploy this app, it's very important that you do not allow this. So you will remove this, otherwise it will be a security issue. And as for another setting, we'll set the course allowed origins. This will be a list as well. I'll copy this same thing over there, and actually let's include something else. This is the same as saying localhost, but instead we are saying it with the IP address, and I'll include that at both places. Another Boolean value that you have to set is the course allow credentials. This will be set to true. Another one is course expose headers, meaning the app will be able to receive these headers. This will be yet again another list, and we'll be able to send the content type, and we'll also be able to set the authorization. The reason we need the authorization is because this is how we are going to send the token. That's about it. These are the settings we need to allow localhost or any other host or link that you'd like to access your API. We'll be changing this when we are actually deploying the app. For now, let's come back and try this once again. I clear the console. And I got some errors. Make sure to run your development server, Python, manage PI, run server. Let's clear it once again and try now. We are saying logging in and we run into some sort of an error right here. Auth form JSX line 50. Okay, the main error was that I need to await this fetch. I actually forgot to put the await keyword there, which is very important. So now I believe we can put back the not okay response. And we should be good to go like this. Let's refresh. We have the credentials. I log in and there we go. We are redirected. And actually in the console, you see that a bunch of data got logged out. For example, this is our token. And now this is stored in the local storage. So I'm actually able to send this in the authorization header later on. Let's see if I'm right now logged in and I try to go to the Auth page, then I get redirected. So our guarding is also working. Now let's log out and handle the sign-up functionality. So to handle the sign-up functionality, I have to come over here to the handle register function, and we'll be doing something very similar to what we did before. Let user data will be the form data, and we'll be doing a try catch block. Inside the catch, I simply do this, and then we'll be doing the same const response, and this is in a way duplicating code. So if you want to, you can refactor this. It will be the await. Pay attention, we are putting the await keyword there now. Await the fetch function, and I will be doing the same as we did. I'll copy over. You can actually leave it at localhost. I just changed this for testing purposes, and this is how it's going to stay now. I pass in a strings this not login but register this time, and then pass in an object. In this object, we'll set the method to be post. The headers will be the same content type JSON. So just copy over the headers, and as for the body, it's actually going to be the same as before with the JSON.stringify, but now we are including the full name as the user data.name. That's all about it. And now we can copy over some of the code from up here. For example, if not response.ok, we yet again await the data, and we do the same as we did before. Basically, we are also logging in the user. I could call the login function as well, but this is good this way. Now let's try this out. Let's say I want to sign up and I fill out these fields. Let's click sign up, and the sign up is actually successful. We get logged in. We are sending this type of data to the server, and it's saying that register was successful, returning our token. Let's go over here to the users list, which Django REST framework provides us, and we've actually created this. And as for the last user, if I zoom in, you see that there is the new user, it has the ID of 4, and all of this stuff is now contained in our database. That's great, we are actually making calls to our backend. With this, we are done with the authentication, and we should move on to the booking part. For that, copy over the booking component that we have provided you in the templates. There is the booking component, and it has a pair, which is of course the CSS file. In our main.jsx, I create something separate for this, a separate route. Inside the app, inside its children, at the start, I'll add another route, which will be with the path /. So this is going to be our home page, and the element is going to be the booking component. That's basically it. It's going to throw us some errors because there are a bunch of elements that are nested inside it and are not yet made. So I guess we'll create those as well. If you have a look at our template, a lot of functionality is missing. Actually, I've removed it so that we can write it together. We are also looking for a room card element. So from the templates, I also pull in the room card. And while you're at it, also pull in the room info and the room image slider because they all go hand in hand. So let's just create a new folder in our components called room details, and copy those inside that, paste those, and also their CSSs if there are any. There is a room details.css that you can put into the folder. And for now, that should be about it. We are getting a bunch of errors saying that this is not defined, that is not defined, and we'll be fixing that together. Over here in our template, I decided to add these use states in as well, just to make our life a little easier. And let's go over these one by one. We have a selected date use state, which contains a start date and an end date. As I showed you in the preview, and I can actually show it to you once again, we can select dates, meaning we need the start and the end date for our booking. The next one is going to be the current date. This will be set to a new date, meaning the current date that we are currently on. Basically, it's just the date in the calendar. Then there is the filtered rooms, meaning not every room is always available. Maybe someone has booked it before you did and you cannot book for it. This is what the filtered will be setting. The isFiltered is just a boolean whether we've already filtered the rooms or not. There will be an error if any errors occur, or there will be a success message if you've successfully booked. Also, there will be a logged in user, which is set to the current user, which is passed in by default. Actually, I'm not sure we need this, whether this was just a leftover from development, but let's move on. And we have the room data, which is basically an array that will get mapped out. So now let's start creating some other stuff. Let's handle the offline functionality before I touch into the use effect and fetch data. What I'd like to do is call the handle date click function, which will be an arrow function that receives a day and a month offset. And this month offset by default is going to be 0. And inside this, you say const selected date, and it will be a new date. And the new date is going to be the current date dot get full year, get full month plus the month offset and the day that's given. So basically, we are selecting the date from the calendar based on the current year. Now, whenever you click one of the tiles, we have to check a bunch of if statements. So for example, if not selected dates dot start date or selected dates dot end date, meaning we haven't selected a start date or we haven't selected an end date, then we'll say set selected dates start date and we'll set the start date to be the selected date and the end date to be null, because this is also true if we've selected 2 dates and we are clicking for the 3rd time, for example, then we'd like to reset it. Otherwise, else if the selected date.time is equal to the start date, so if we clicked the same button twice, we'll assume that the user only wants to book one certain date. This is just some extra functionality. We'll be handling this better later on. So start date, selected date, and the end date will also be set to that. Otherwise, and inside that there will be some other statements as well. These will be the statements that we'll be needing. So if the selected date is greater than the start date, then we simply set it to be the end date. That's pretty simple. But if that's not the case, then we'll set the selected date to be the start date, meaning we selected, for example, the 15th of October, but then the second click is the 13th of October, then we have to switch the two because one comes sooner than the other. That's what this is for. And actually it's commented. So if I copy this whole commented line over that will be provided on GitHub, you will see what each of these do explicitly. And at the end, I'll simply set the error to be nothing. The next function we'll be using is going to be the handle month change. The logic inside this is pretty simple. We create a new date based on the current date and set its month to be the current date.getMonth plus however much we incremented it by. Meaning if we switched by 1, which is allowed in the app, then we increment it by 1. But if the increment is greater because we've switched 2 times now, then it will give it to the current date plus 2. And then we set the current date to be that actual date. This is the sliding and the switching between months in our tiles. Now I'll copy the next functionality and we'll go over this together. This is actually a pretty big functionality. So let me close the other ones up. And this functionality is going to be the generate calendar days. The generate calendar days is going to get the current date's full year, the months, and all this stuff out of this. We get the days in the current month and the start of the month, and also the days in the previous month. And because we know how many days are in the previous month, in the next month, and in the current one, we can actually construct a solid calendar for ourselves. The days is going to be an empty array by default. And we basically go over the months and add the previous month's days, however much there was left. We add the current month's days and the next month's day. And the way it works is that you see there is always a fixed amount of rows in here. So if I start switching around things, there are some leftovers from the previous month, there are leftovers from the next month, and there is our current one. This is a subtle differentiation in the styling as well. And then we count the remaining slots because we have 42. And we remove the days.length from it, and the rest will be set up from the other months, for example the next or the previous month. And we return the days. And I'll also say const days to be the generate calendar days. So we call this function now and store it in the days, because this days is passed in our component. We map this out. Let's have a look at the next function. This is going to be the largest one so far. This function is going to be called handle filter rooms. If we've not yet selected a proper start date and end date, then this is going to throw us back an error and setting the filter to be false, saying please select a valid date. If the end date is for some reason null, then what we'll say is that the user wants to capture only or book only one day, and we'll set the end date to be the start date. Then there is a function whether it's in the date range or not, and it gets an occupied date. The way this is used is that it goes over all the available rooms that we'll be fetching and all the occupied dates. If the current room has an occupied date for the date range that we've selected, then that room will be out of the game. It won't be showed at all, even if it's just one day. The user will have to select a different date for that time. It would have been quite bothersome to write this logic together again, so instead I just pasted this in. You'll be able to find the code and paste this in as well, but I hope it's understandable what we are actually doing over here. And one last functionality I missed is the isDateSelected. This will check whether we have a date selected at all, because if we do not, we return a boolean value depending on that. And you can see what each of these does in the comment over here. And if you come back to our app, with these functions implemented, we should be able to select ranges, and the book rooms functionality won't be working. We haven't got any data fetched for now, and we should be able to switch between these. If I select one from 31 and for 3 months later, then they will all be selected. So it's pretty dynamic. With all this functionality done, the last thing that I will do here is call a use effect above our function, call use effect, and pass in an empty dependency array. And inside this function, since use effect cannot handle async functionality, we'll create an async function inside it. Async function fetch room data. We'll incorporate a try catch block inside it. The catch is going to be simple, just some console logging out. And after we've defined this function, I'll actually call this function, fetch room data. This will run whenever you visit the home page. So at every visit of the home page, you'll actually fetch new data. But inside the try block, we'll have to reach out to our API once again. So const response. This will be the await functionality with the fetch. And let's go back to our authentication, our auth form over here, and copy over this one. So in strings, you can look for the HTTP localhost 8000/, and we're looking for the current rooms. As for the second parameter, we'll pass in the method and all the other stuff. The method will be a get method. We are fetching data after all, and that's about it. Because we'll be storing it in the response, whatever we get back. I play if the response is not okay once again, and const data will be the await response.json. We are parsing it into JSON data. I say console.log fetching successful, and I'll also say set room data and pass in the data. This way, if we are successful at fetching, we'll be able to show our rooms, because this room data will be passed down to our cards, which should be able to handle it. So let's see if I reload the page. We get fetching successful, and we've actually fetched the data from our running server. There are the URLs and all the other stuff that we have. If I want to book some rooms, we still get an error. Well, the reason we got a bunch of errors when we were trying to book is not because of our front-end logic, but because I've actually missed some stuff in our serializers. We've not hooked up the user for the occupied dates, and we did not hook up the occupied dates for the room image serializer. And we are trying to filter those occupied dates, which are not even in our database, or at least not yet available from these forms. So we have to fix this as soon as possible. First of all, the room serializer. Let's go over here, and we do have the images set up, but we also need the occupied dates to be set up. Occupied dates, and this should be the occupied dates serializer. Many will be set to true, and read only will also be set to true. Now you see it's underlined, and that's because I have to grab this occupied dates serializer and cut it and put it above the room serializer. And while we're at it, this occupied date serializer also has some missing functionality, which is the user, because it should know of the user since it has a foreign key setup. So it should be serializers.hyperlinked related field, and the view name will be set to user-detail. And as for the second parameter, its query set is going to be the user.objects.all. So with these changes set up, I don't know if we have to migrate. Let's try it out. Python manage PI make migrations. No changes detected, so we do not have to migrate. That's great news, because then we do not have to wipe our whole database down. And I can just run the server, and let's see if we run into any further issues. Yes, there is an internal server error that we get, and that's because we also need to imply these into the fields. So whatever I've set up, the occupied dates over here, make sure it's in the room serializer, and we need the user to be here as well in the occupied dates serializer. Let's see now. Now we are fetching the data successfully at both places. Let's see if we get any errors. And right now this is working. This functionality is actually working, and the images are being served from Django because we are still in the debug view. So from time to time you run into these kinds of errors, and it's good to know how to debug those. And the way I did this is I saw that it's saying undefined. I found out where exactly it's saying undefined, and then I looked at the damn database and realized that it's truly undefined because there is no link in there, no URL in there. So that's something you have to keep in mind, and that's why I'm leaving it in this video, because you will essentially run into errors over and over and over again. That's what coding is about. So this functionality is now working. The next one we'll be working on is actually booking the rooms inside the room card. Alright, so let's get to handling the booking functionality, because right now we can render out the rooms that are available, but we cannot really click on the book button without getting any errors. And in the template files, I've given you this handle booking function in the room card, and we'll be working in this. So if you enter this function, the first thing that we'll check is whether the user is empty or not. Because if the user is null, then I'm going to return with the navigate functionality. The navigate hook is pulled in from the React router DOM, and I'll navigate back to the /auth. Because if someone's not logged in and trying to book, we should navigate him back to the navigation tab, or sorry, the authentication tab. I'll also console.log out the user.token just in case, and I'll construct a base URL. Now this base URL will be needed because we'll be sending multiple requests out to the API, and I don't want to repeat myself. Grab this base URL from wherever we've implemented an API before. Over here, this will be the HTTP. Simply put this in, don't put the / at the end now. This is going to be just the base URL, and then we'll construct some other URLs from this. For example, the room URL. The room URL will be a template string, so it will have the base URL inside it, and then /rooms /room ID, which is again going to be in template string because this function has the room ID passed in. And then put a / at the end here. And we'll be doing the same, but instead of calling it room URL, I'll call it user URL. And pass in the user ID. Now we have to do a little check over here. We have a start date, but we don't have an end date. Then we set the end date to be the start date, meaning this is a scenario where we handle that the guy only wants to book for 1 day, meaning he only ticked 1 day on the calendar. Next, we'll be having to make a for loop, and this for loop, the iterator is going to be a new date from the start date, and we are going, the current date being, until we reach the end date, and we continuously give +1 to the date, meaning we increment the day that we are currently on at each iteration. I hope this makes sense. Basically, we are iterating over the days. And inside this, we can now create a try catch block. As always, I'll handle the catch first because that's pretty easy to set up. The catch will be this simple error message. And inside the try block, we have to send some requests. So as usual, const response will be the await fetch function, and we are going to send some requests to the base URL and then /. And what I'm interested in is the occupied dates. And luckily we made an API for that, but then you might be asking, then why did we store the URLs for the room and the user? Well, the reason I stored it is because, remember, we are using hyperlinks in our database, meaning if you refer to one of the APIs and you post to it, you need to send the user and the room as well. So let's continue. As the object that I'm going to pass in, I'll say that the method should be post. And inside the headers, there is going to be something new that we haven't looked into before. Since it's a requirement to be logged in or registered for this functionality to work, I'll also, next to the content type application/JSON, we'll also implement something else. There is going to be an authorization, and this authorization field is going to get our token. It's important that you write out token like this and then hit a space after, because this is the syntax that it requires you. And then you pass in the user.token, because the user was stored when we logged in, or when with the session it's stored in the local storage. And with this we send the current token that we have, and if it doesn't receive the token, then because we've set up permissions in our database, it will throw us back. And now comes the body. Inside the body, I yet again just use the json.stringify, and inside that put in an object where we define the room, which will be the room URL. Remember I said that we need to send these as a form of URL. The user will be the user URL, and the date, well, this will be a formatted string. And please take note that whenever I'm using the local date, I'm setting it to be Hungary, because I didn't go out of the way and made the ISO strings so that it's formattable for everyone, because then it would require some more work with the dates. So if you want to really use this app, make sure to do that, work on that, because that part of the date management is a bit tough and I was too tired by the end of this project to make it. Or if you are just looking for a local one country booking app, like for example for Hungary, Russia, United States, whatever, then make sure to insert the proper ticker over there. And after this is done, in the source code I have a bunch of console logs over here. I'll omit those for now. That was because I was debugging the code. We'll play the if not response.ok card alert again, and we'll store the data. Const data will be the await response.json, and we'll call the onBooking success function. The onBooking success function is needed so we provide a success message on the booking, and this comes from the upper component passed down to this component. So I simply call that function, and then maybe console log out the success message as well. And this is where we call the handle booking on click of that blue button, and we pass in the room.id. The room is passed in from the iterations. The selected date range is also passed in, and the user is from the user.id. The reason I'm referring to this as user.user.id is because when I was constructing this, I ran into an error in production. It turned out that inside the object that we saved, there was the user object, and then inside that there was the ID. So it looks a little weird, but it's usable. It was a last minute problem that I ran into in production. Right, so with this we should be able to test this out. What I'll also do is open up the localhost 8000 because I've closed it in the meanwhile, and we'll have a look at the occupied dates. Let's try to book for the 21st of December. And as you see, the deluxe suite is not available because in the booking app I've already made a booking for the deluxe suite. So maybe I should do something else, like from 30 to 31. And I can then book for the deluxe suite. Let's see if we get any errors if I click the book button. And we do, for some reason. We'll have a look. This is a bad request. It goes out to the occupied dates. If we have a look at the network tab, and there is our problem. If you have a look in the network tab, you can always switch to the current requests that are going with Auth. This is the occupied dates request because it's a strict mode. I believe it's going out twice. But what you have to take away from here is that you can have a look at the headers. What are you sending in the headers? The payload, the preview, the response. And in the response, it's saying user, invalid hyperlink, incorrect URL matching. And why is that? If you have a look at the payload, I didn't change this to be user. It's still looking for the room. So what I have to do is come back to our cards and look at what we are sending. And it's true that I just copied this over and forgot to paste in to be user instead of rooms. And is the URL right? Let me see. /users is what we are looking for. Yes, so we are looking for the /users. So make sure to have the proper URL over here, otherwise you run into a problem. But that's not really an issue because I've just showed you how to debug this. So let's try this once more. I'll try to book. Let's open up the console and I'll click book room. Now it says the booking is successful. We get back a bunch of data. because of the console logs. And if I have a look at the occupied dates, there we go, then we see that a new date has been occupied, actually 2 dates, because we stored only a single date, and we occupied from the 30 to the 31st. This is great. Our booking functionality is now fully functional. One last thing that I'd like to do on the front end, and it's going to be only a copy pasting because the code is yet again working with dates and it's very bothersome, but we'll go over it, is displaying all the rooms. We don't have that route implemented yet, so that's something we'll be doing, and then we can go on to deploying our app. Alright, so let's go back to our code, and actually not only the all rooms, there is going to be the my bookings. The my bookings is going to be the bothersome part. The all rooms is going to be just alright. So come to our main.jsx, because that's where we handle routing, and create another path. Copy this out once again, and this is going to be all rooms instead. And we'll create a new component. Actually copy this from the templates, copy it into the components. It's going to be called all rooms, and copy its CSS as well. And inside here, the element should be the all rooms. It will get auto imported if you wait for the IDE. There we go. Notice all rooms is also missing some functionality. What is it missing? It's missing a use state where it needs to fetch the data. So we should probably write this together, because this won't be working if you just click on it. Let's create a use effect, put in an empty dependency array at the end. And again, since use effect cannot handle async functionalities, we have to create the async function inside it. Async function, it will be called fetch room data, won't be having parameters. And let's create a try catch block. We've done this a few times now. It's going to be rather simple. I pass in the catch and const response. Response is going to be equal to the await, and we're awaiting the fetch from our basic URL, which I'll grab in a minute. So we're awaiting from over here, and not just the base URL, we are awaiting it from the rooms, and then put a slash at the end. And as for the object, I simply say the method to be a get method, and that's all, because if you're using a get method, you don't need to pass in anything more. We'll see if the response is okay or not, and then we'll say const data equals await response.json. And what I'm going to do is there is a use state that's not yet functional, and we'll set the room data to be the data that we fetched. And that's basically it. This is a simple fetch from our API. And also, don't forget to call this function once you're done with it. So fetch room data. Let's see if this works in our app. If I refresh the all rooms, it fetches. We don't get any console logs out this time, but it's not a problem because we see that it fetches, and I can switch between the images that are served from Django. So our all rooms is working. It's a simple fetch. Now we have to go to the my bookings, which will display our bookings, and this route is only going to be available in the navbar if you're logged in. If I log out, this route will just simply disappear, so I have to log in yet again. Alright, so copy over the occupied dates display from our templates as well. This has all the functionality embedded into it. There won't be much coding. We'll be just having a look at it. Paste it into the components. So both the CSS and the display as well. And let's open those up. This basically has a group date use state and a user pulled in from the user context, which we're already familiar with. And it has a use effect. If the user is null, it returns. There is a base URL. This is actually the deployed link that I have deployed while I was testing. So we have to change this to be the localhost one for now. I'll copy it over here, paste it in, and this is going to be our base URL. Then in the response, we fetch for the occupied dates, just as we did before, and we don't have to do anything else. It gets a get method. It will also receive an authorization token, because to fetch the occupied dates, you have to know who you are dealing with. So this means you have to be logged in. If we are not okay, we throw back a response, so we throw back an error, and then we store the data and console log it out, and also return the data over here. There is a function for processing and setting the dates. It calls the fetch date functions and it returns the data. This is still inside the use effect, so this happens when you visit, and then Basically what this will do is that because the occupied dates are dates one by one, it creates ranges out of those dates. There are comments all over here. It's a little bit of a spaghetti code, but that's alright. And after this is done, we set the group dates to be the process dates, fetch dates. But it's more visual, and if we have a look at it, and there is the object.keys that's mapping out from the group dates. So it's mapping out this HTML. The local date string here is also set to who as of Hungarian. Let's hook this up in our main.jsx. So there will be a path, and this path won't be guarded because it returns us once we are not logged in, but you should be guarding it. It's just that I ran out of time and I had to record this, so I didn't have time to make any more adjustments. So path will be my bookings, and the element will be the occupied dates display. With this, if we visit our app and go to my bookings, since we are logged in, we should be able to see that we have 2 bookings for this account. But if I log out, log in with, I don't know, me@gmail.com, we don't have any other bookings left, so this is left empty. We should also provide some sort of message here, but for lack of time, I didn't do that. These are all things that you can improve your own app with, and you can expand upon this app however much you want, but this is going to be our base functionality. I log in with the test again, and now with the front end being basically done, we can move on to render to deploy our database, our Django app, and all the other stuff. I hope you enjoyed it and found value in it. If you did, please consider giving us a like and maybe even subscribe. And other than that, I hope to see you in the next one. Happy coding and God bless.